Thank you, King. Hi, everybody. I'm Don Carwell, and I'm an alcoholic. It's by God's grace and because of 12 steps working in my life today that it hadn't been necessary for me to drink again today. And I hadn't for 6,359 days, one day at a time. That's been since July 8, 1976. I'm grateful as I know how to be for that. There's a lot of people here now. I'm glad to see all of you, too. And I'm really glad that all of you I see are here, too. Wasn't always that way in my life. Me and my family would be sitting around sometimes, and I'd have company, and they wouldn't. I don't know if y'all can understand that or not. It happened to me. This speaker that we got tonight has been a very dear and very special friend to me. Probably about 8 or 10 years ago, if you'd asked me what God was like, I'd probably said he was bald-headed and chewed on a pipe, and he's black, and he lives in Little Rock. But I hung around him long enough to see him get mad one day over something that wouldn't even bother me. So I decided that he may be human, And, I come to love Joe very much and believe he loves me, and I know you're in for a treat tonight, so without taking up any more of his time, just a minute before we do that, James is taping over here. All of you that hadn't been here before, this mess over here in the corner, that's James M's taping, and he sells those tapes. Poor boy is up here from South Louisiana, and if we don't buy some tapes from him for $4 a piece, he's going to stay up here. So get over there and buy a bunch of them damn things, And we want to thank James for coming up here, too. He's very special to us. They're $4 a piece, and they'll be ready just almost as soon as Joe says the last word. So you're getting this on tape, too, aren't you, James? All right, good. I want to be sure we got that commercial in there. With nothing else, Joe, come on up.
My name is Joe, and I'm a real alcoholic. Through God's grace, and because this program works one day at a time in my life, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since the 10th of March, 1962. For this, I'm extremely grateful. And this is a beautiful bunch. I always love when I get before a bunch of alcoholics who looks the same way. I love to say it's the best-looking bunch of sick people I've seen all day. It's good to be back in Monroe. I didn't realize until coming here tonight, we were talking how long that I hadn't been here. I mean, time goes by, I used to be a year go by or so that I wasn't down here, and then all at once, no one invited me. I guess I was going the other way. But whatever it is in God's will, it's great to be back, to see a lot of my great old friends in the program here that we're still here, growing older in the program. If someone said, "You look older," I said, "Hell, I am older." Last month I got my Medicare card. And you know when they give those away. Proud of that. But what we talk about tonight, they say we talk about what we were like and what happened and what we were like now. And I think I feel very blessed tonight as a person on the face of this earth as to be able to talk about these things. Most alcoholics that are living today will never be able to talk about those things. In fact, I feel very blessed as an alcoholic because, I feel most alcoholics will never learn that they're alcoholics. But I have not only had an opportunity to discover that, but discover a program that brought me to a way of living that I never thought existed. A way that I never would have been able to live had I not been an alcoholic. I don't know why I'm an alcoholic. I guess usually hear people be talking about why they're alcoholic. You got so many of these great things going on, so much research. You know, it's about your mama, and your daddy, and your genes, and all that. You know, sometimes you get pretty damn confused about why you're an alcoholic. It has a lot to do with drinking whiskey. They never mentioned that, did they? So I guess that's the main reason I'm an alcoholic. But what it was like, you know, I was born in Louisville, Kentucky. I relived that, and I'm able to go back and forth to there. And I remember my existence as a child. I was born in a poor family. I remember many years I didn't have a resentment, but I was in self-pity about the way I grew up. And I've looked back on it in retrospect, you know, everybody was poor. You know, they didn't even draw the poverty line. Everybody was behind the line. I mean, we didn't know we was poor because everybody else was poor. But I remember growing up in this family with these people and the experiences that we had growing up. I always say we had plenty to eat because every time I asked my mother for some more, she said, "You've already had a plenty," so I guess I had plenty to eat. But I know, looking back, that there was some happy times as a child probably, but I don't remember that too well. And I remember that the experiences of growing up. And I don't think that I was unique or different from any other child growing up, even yet today. We wonder sometimes, I think, what's wrong with our young people? Nothing. They're just growing up. Growing up is one of the most painful parts of life, becoming an adult. And I went through these things as a young person. And I remember when I was about 18 years old, I remember my very first drink. I remember that night. I remember the people, so it must have been the whole incident of my very first drink, so it had some impression on my life. I don't remember my first Coca-Cola, our first banana split, but I remember my first drink very vividly. It would be many years after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous that I was to really find out in retrospect what had happened. As Dr. Silkworth talked about that particular night, I found in my life a sense of ease and comfort that came at once by taking a few drinks of alcohol. You know, I discovered that night, you know, what alcohol would do in my life. Maybe I needed it. Maybe I wondered what would happen had I not discovered alcohol. But he said, you know, I was to pursue, our book says, that great illusion. And that's what it was. It was an illusion, something that is not true. I pursued it to the gates of insanity or death. And I had a lot of problems. Thank God I did, you know. I had a lot of problems with alcohol. You know, right from, you know, I immediately had problems with it. Alcohol never gave me a chance. It was downhill from then on, after my very first drink. You know, I didn't know I was an alcoholic. In fact, you know, as we said, no alcoholic knows he's an alcoholic. I hear a lot of people say alcoholics are in denial. First thing you got to know before you can deny. I didn't even know I was an alcoholic. And when you don't know you're an alcoholic, then you try to do things that non-alcoholic people do. You know, because, you know, if you knew you was alcoholic, you wouldn't try to do things like get married and get a job and do the normal. An alcoholic can't do those things. But when you don't know you're an alcoholic, you try to do those things. So I immediately began to do a lot of things I didn't know I couldn't do. And I got in a hell of a lot of trouble. I got married and I was divorced in about 4 or 5 years. You know, look back on it now as, you know, a blooming drinking problem in a young marriage. It never had a chance. I had a couple of kids in this marriage, and I was divorced, my wife and I separated. And I came back home I was living in Indiana, And I came back to Kentucky to live with my father. There I was, I was 25 years old when I was back home. We alcoholics, I hear a lot of people say that we have family problems. I didn't have any family problems. I loved and took care of my family because that was my existence. I needed those people. I'd always come home when I got broke, come back to my father's house. Sort of like the prodigal son. But my father didn't kill a fatted calf for me. When he saw me coming, he'd drop his little old head and hold his pocketbook when he saw me coming. He didn't have no party for me. But I would hang around for a while and lose a few jobs and get in some troubles and situations. And I would always, after 6 months or a year, I'd say, this town is no good. I just can't do no good in this place. And he'd say, how much you want to borrow? He would always lend me some money to leave town. I didn't realize for years what he was doing. He was way ahead of me. He would always lend me some money to leave town. And of course, I'd go away and I wouldn't stay away too long. Wouldn't get away too far where I couldn't get back. Things would get bad and I'd go back. On one occasion, I think it was 1958, things had, on one of my little excursions, sort of fallen apart. I didn't really want to go back to my father's house and go back there and live. Maybe I had a spark of decency and some other things that happened I didn't want to go back and face right away either. So I thought about my sister in Little Rock. I said, why don't you go see your sister? Now, my sister had kind of gotten off of me. I hadn't seen her in about 8 or 9 years. She went to Little Rock and going to college, coming out of high school. She went down there going to college. She went to school there, and she had met a young man. They got married, and over the period of years, having a couple of kids and going back to school, she had gotten a job. She was teaching school and had 2 young kids. And I hadn't seen her in about 7 or 8 years. And I said, on this particular occasion, I said, you ought to go see your sister. God, that's not right treating her that way. That's the way I would, And so this is the way I came to Little Rock. I realize now that, probably this was God's will in my life. I realize today that probably God was taking interest in my life at that time. I realize today maybe it was part of God's plan, God's purpose in my life. God's purpose is hard to see. But I'm in a period of time in my life, in my living experience, that I can begin to see God's purpose in my life. The whole thing is working for some reason, some direction, some control. And I feel very blessed today to be able to do what I'm doing and to work with people in Little Rock area and to work with alcoholics. And I think maybe, that it was part of God's plan. And I think the greatest you're going to ever feel in your life is when you fulfill your purpose for living. I feel today that, I am in God's purpose in my life. It began many, many years ago when I came to Little Rock. Maybe it was the reason God's purpose that I be an alcoholic so that I could do these things. Maybe it was probably God's purpose that I recover. So it all began, and it didn't seem like a big thing to me at that time. In 1958, when I came to Little Rock, I came to Little Rock like I did everywhere else, where I started all over, broke and in trouble. And I always talk about how I got off of that Greyhound bus at Saturday night. I had $4 in my pocket, and I had a little drunk suitcase. God, it was a little bitty suitcase, and it had a necktie tied around one end. They'll never have but one latches on those drunk suitcases. Drunks still travel the same way. They haven't changed a bit. You can see them. They always got a necktie around their suitcase. Nowadays, here lately, they don't. Some of them don't have suitcases. I noticed they're using those black garbage bags. But we have them come into the treatment center all the time, and with little cardboard boxes, black garbage bags, drunk suitcases. They still look the same way. We had one guy come to the treatment center a few years ago, and everybody knows I'm interested in this. And one of the guys come up to me and said, "Hey, Joe, this guy can't get in here. This guy ain't going to never get sober." I said, "Why?" He said, "He's got alligator luggage. You can't get sober. You can't get sober with alligator luggage." Well, anyway, I remember I went to live with my sister. I could always get a job. Boy, you know, we alcoholics, if you're a real alcoholic, you can get a job. Work is not our problem, right? If you're the kind of alcoholic like I was, you have probably been through 3 professions. You know, when the alcoholic says, when you ask the alcoholic, "What do you do for a living?" He says almost anything. He is not lying. You know, if you just do have one thing you know what to do, in an average town, and outside in 18 months, everybody in that business will be done fired you. So you got to know something else to do. So I had a lot of things I could do. So I got a job. I could always get a job. Went to work. I was living there with my sister. God bless her. She's just retired last year from the school system, 30-some years teaching school there. Just retired this year. The sweet lady. Always has been, just something special. She's involved in church as just a child. And used to play the piano. I remember when she was just big enough for her feet to dangle off of the seat. She grew up in music and in the school system there. And has a beautiful voice, and she's always been interested in church music at church. So she was going to a little church here. Her husband was a lay speaker of the church. She was the choir director, and they were involved in this little church, and she taught school. She had a couple of little kids. You know, what a terrible place for a drunk to get involved with them people. You know, I don't know why we get mixed up with the strangest bunch of folks. You know, drunks don't fit into something like that. These people going to church on Sunday morning, shining shoes and cooking bacon and eggs, and you trying to get over Saturday night. You know, that's miserable. So one Sunday morning, they sounded like they were invited me and hinted a couple of weeks. Then after a few weeks, they started threatening me about church. I wasn't contributing too much. You know how you feel uncomfortable. you know how a drunk is. He know he ain't, So y'all got on tipping along anyway, on thin ice. So I broke down and promised them. I said, "Yeah, I'll go." When I went to church with her one Sunday. This is where I met Lou Bell. Lou Bell is a great part of my life. She's part of my struggle for recovery, and I don't know if I would ever recover. I had even looked at my life if it hadn't been for Lou Bell getting involved in my life, because it was just me at this time. And I remember Lou Bell and I talk about this all the time. We've never come to the agreement on this, how this happened. But she sees it another way, different than I do. But I was a nice-looking young man at that time. Been 35 years ago, I guess. Yeah, 35 years. I guess this Christmas we'll be married. But I remember Lou Bell was a good friend of my sister. Lou Bell sang in the choir. You know how the choir director and the choir members are real tight. So Lou Bell was a good friend of my sister. And I come into church that morning with my sister, a good camouflage, and the lay speaker of the church. I had a good front, And of course, here I was, and Lou Bell and I met there in the church. Now, you know how we alcoholics operate by selling fast conversation to these slow-thinking ladies. I give her my best shot that morning. I should have had an Academy Award. She hadn't recovered from that yet. In fact, I think they still discuss that at Al-Anon meetings, But, now, look, I'm working out this suitcase, 3 weeks there. Still working out this suitcase. Lou Bell's owns her own little home. We still live in the same as her house. I don't own nothing. I still live there. But Lou Bell had a little home. She'd had a little modest home there. She had a new car, and she had a good working job, right? And I thoroughly convinced her how she needed me to take care of her. Well, I was my best job, and I didn't let her think too long. You know, we got married in right that Christmas Eve. This was about September when we met. By Christmas Eve, we got married, and it was embarrassing because we alcoholics love to celebrate, particularly getting married. So I took off from work. I was waiting tables and working in hotels, and the hotels business kind of shuts down during the holidays after the Christmas parties. And between New Year's and Christmas, ain't nobody traveling, so the hotels are slow. So it was a good time. I took off and did a little honeymooning at home by myself. She had to go to work, But I stayed there and stocked in the good supply of liquor and started drinking during that week. And I drank my way right into the old state hospital. I was married a week. 2 weeks after I was married, I was locked up in Nut House. That's kind of embarrassing, right? Your wife, Bluebell probably went to a church and somebody said, "How's married life?" She said, "That fool's in Nut House already." Didn't me in 1 week. I tell her she drove me crazy. She said, "No, you're still outpatient from out there at that place." Well, we were locked up back then. We didn't have detox centers. We didn't have. Thank God we do have so many. That's what part of my life is, making things better for. I don't think things are too good for alcoholics. But we just had the old state hospital. It was the old Arkansas Insane Asylum. It was still there. It wasn't. That's what it was. And this is where they'd put you and lock you up, and they just locked you up in there with the mental patients. And there wasn't any program there. There wasn't anything there. There wasn't even an AA meeting. It was a segregated ward then, and wasn't even an AA meeting on our ward at that time. So I got out of there, and I had a problem. As I said, I was an alcoholic, and I didn't even know I was an alcoholic, less than I don't know what to do about it. I was a victim of my problem. I was a victim of my circumstances. And no one that whole time, that 30 days, ever mentioned alcoholism, ever mentioned AA. It was just a matter of being there, drying out. So I got out of there, and the only thing I had a problem, and quite naturally, I went back to drinking. That's the only thing I could do as an alcoholic, because that's what alcoholics do. It's natural for practicing alcoholics to get drunk. That's the natural thing for alcoholics. It's nothing, it's natural to alcoholics. So I went through this, and I was, on an occasion, I always talk about this time period of 2 years, from 1960 to 1962. It was on and off for me, mostly on. Wasn't much of a marriage. I began to be a traveling drunk, going from place to place again. I don't know why. Just doing this like I do in Louisville, just do it like I did my father. I take a drink, go off somewhere drunk, stay drunk 3 or 4 months, and then come back home. I said, "Y'all go see your wife." Whenever it dawned on me. And I'd come home. She'd have a mouth stuck out. She'd be mad. After all, I'll come back just to see her. I heard a guy talking about that. He said that he used to do that. He said one day he had been gone about 3 months. He was driving down the road in a blackout, and we had another woman in his car, and he's in trouble. And he said, "I better go home." He told his wife he was going to get a pack of cigarettes. And 3 months later, here he is somewhere drunk, don't know where he's at. And I was sort of the same way. So he said he got his self together, straightened, got rid of this woman, straightened himself up and drove 400 miles back home. He was 400 miles from home. So he drove in the house, went in, it was ashamed to walk in. You know how ashamed we are. He walked on in and she spoke, said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." And he said he went out in the bathroom, took a shower, and come out. And she looked at him and she said, "Did you get your cigarettes?" But But this is the way I sort of operate. And I come back and I was on one of these occasions in Kansas City. And God put a little guy in my life. And my life today is, and what marvels me is, the experience of a lot of wonderful, simple, small people, I like to call them. Not the learned, not the powerful, not the almighty, but just small, insignificant people that have worked in my life. God uses strange people. Now, I was in Kansas City, and I went, and a particular morning I needed a drink. And this bar, it opens up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd always be down there in the morning to get me a drink. And I went in there one morning, and there wasn't a lot of social drinkers in there in the morning. Not that early. So I lowered myself to drink with some winos. I wasn't really a wino unless my money said wine every once in a while. And these guys were trying to get their money together to get some wine. I think it was 60 cents. I had $4 that morning. I was loaded. And they was doing it. I said, that's okay, I'll buy. So I bought a pint of wine, big shot. And they would pour the wine up in the glasses. They wouldn't give the winos the bottle. You buy the bottle and they'd pour it in the glasses, and then they would throw the bottle over. I could hear that bottle now crashing in a big paper barrel they had over there. And all the winos, once this girl could pour the wine, she wouldn't repeat. She'd just come right down the line. Boom. And they would be level. But nothing is perfect for we alcoholics. They'd get down and look at them, Sometimes they would have a meeting or vote and decide which, but nothing's perfect. But they would finally decide that one of those glasses did have a hair more than the other. I didn't know what they was doing. And winos are classy people, got a lot of class. Then they would give that to the guy who bought. Right? That's the way they did it. So I was standing there, and they give me the glass. We got to, how that, you as an alcoholic, there is nothing like the first drink in the morning. Boy, there's not a chemical in the world as wonderful as the first drink in the morning. It eases you off. God, you're ready for the day. Okay? And we had that first drink, and as we drank, some conversation, lighter conversation. And Van looked at me and said, Joe, you're a pretty nice guy. He'd been standing there shaking the glass, hitting his mouth, tears running down his eyes. He said, you're a pretty nice guy. And I said, well, I've been knowing that, He said, you're a lot different from me, and you're a lot different from the rest of these guys down here on the street. Well, I knew that. I knew I wouldn't like them winos. But he said, Joe, you got one problem. And I said, what is that? He said, Joe, you're drinking too much. God. I had a problem, and I was getting my answer. And I knew I had a problem in my life. The one time I did it, I didn't understand the problem. The first step to recovery is to understand the problem in your life. And I began right there with Van. Thank God for Van, because it wasn't all the information I needed, but it was the beginning of a pursuit of it. I began to say, I got out of that bar, I went to work, and began to dwell on my mind. And I think that was about a Friday, and long about Wednesday, I left Kansas City to come back to Little Rock, and I began to get the idea, that I had a problem, and I could see I thought that at that time, I said, well, my problem is drinking. Okay, drinking is my problem. But I found out later my problem was way more complex than just drinking. That was just part of my problem. Not only I couldn't drink, but I couldn't quit either, and that was my big problem. I think people, my problem wasn't quitting. I found out later I just couldn't stop starting. Starting was my problem. But that was at least a start, and I came home to quit drinking. God, I know some of y'all maybe went through that phase, right? And I said, if I could just quit drinking. So I came home, and finally I was able to. So after I felt bad, I got a job, went back to work, and I quit drinking, and I didn't drink for 9 months. And I immediately found out that drinking wasn't all my problem. I was miserable. You know, I was restless, the doctor said, and I was irritable and discontented, and I went through these things for 9 months. And finally, the morning came, as our book says, the day will finally come when we don't. That moment, just that moment, it's not all day. It doesn't take but a moment of insanity, of that great illusion, or that delusion, or that insanity, or that strange mental blank spot comes. And it came to me that morning after 9 months. And I was sort of like Jim. I remember going into the liquor store, and I remember all of a sudden at work one day deciding that I was going to take a drink. And I remember walking across the lot to a liquor store, and I remember buying a half pint of vodka and walking all the way back and going into the restroom and kind of screwing the top off and looking at it saying, hey man, you're really messing up, and drinking it. I remember that insanity. And I remember going through the well-known spree, and after 6 weeks of drinking, I was sitting on a bar one morning, March the 10th, 1962, and I probably had a great gift from God. I probably had that moment of reality, a total surrender, like Bill had. He said when quicksand stretched all around him, you know, and he said, I had met my match. Alcohol was my master. And I don't think I was capable of that on my own. I think that ability had to come from somewhere beyond me. But all at once sitting on that bar, you know, I didn't need another drink. I couldn't go on another bit longer with that. I was totally defeated. You know, that's what our book talks about. Step one is willingness. Yeah. When do we become willing? You know, that's not just an easy state of mind. That's not something that we wish for. But willingness comes to we individuals only when we totally 100% convinced that what we are doing is not going to work. Then we become willing to change. Yeah? And I was totally convinced that morning, after 16 or 17 years of hard practice, that what I was trying to do was never going to work. Right? And I became willing to give it up. Immediately, thing I had in my mind came to my mind was some stupid idea about going back to the state hospital. Now, that was the only kind of help I knew it in the night, that morning. I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know Alcoholics Anonymous was in Little Rock. In fact, I didn't know too much about Alcoholics Anonymous. Maybe I saw a movie or something. No, I never really knew anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I never knew anyone that ever knew anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous. In fact, I knew a lot of alcoholics and seen a lot of alcoholics, and all the alcoholics that I had ever seen up to 1962 drank and died. I had never seen an alcoholic that got sober. I had never seen anybody that had seen one of them. Right? In fact, Alcoholics Anonymous was so anonymous, I didn't even know it was there. So the only kind of thing I knew was the state hospital. So that morning I had a couple of dollars in my pocket. And I got off the bar stool, and I went over by my mother-in-law's house, and I called a cab and went to the state hospital that morning. I checked in there. I had 50 cents in my pocket. And that was it, 50 cents. I didn't own I wasn't no more in the bank. I didn't have none invested. That was the last 50 cents that I owned. And I remember that, checking into this place, and it was just like, it's different like going to the treatment centers. We got all alcoholics there. And it's sometimes going back is like, welcome back, but this was different. The Old State Hospital was full of mental patients. Our ward was a segregated ward, locked ward, bars on the windows. This whole place had been built there right after the Civil War. Big double brick walls and wood floors, big old high ceilings. We had bedrooms on either side, kind of dormitory rooms where we slept. Big wide hall down the middle. They get you up at 6 o'clock, lock the bedroom doors, and put you in that hallway. Our activities of the day was walking up and down that hallway until they open your bed at 9 o'clock at night. That was the day, and sitting on an old bench down the side. Thank you, now. So that day, Saturday morning, I went out there to check in. Alcoholics, it was strange there. When you first go in a mental institution, people don't talk to you. They're kind of scared of you. If you're new coming in, people don't, and then the people already in there, even though they're crazy, they don't want to talk to you because they know, what you are like. So they won't have nothing to do with you when you first go in. And the nuts wouldn't talk to me, and they had about 4 alcoholics on the ward. Now, the alcoholics were the class of the ward. We were the big shots. It was a status symbol to be an alcoholic on that ward. See, some of these people had been there. One guy there was 6 years old, had been there since 36, had been there since he was 6 years old. It was the kind of place where families put their certain people in their families and forgot about them. It was people that lived there right there in Little Rock that hadn't visited those people in 20 years. They just become non-people. These people didn't have an identity as human beings. And of course, we alcoholics we would have visitors. Even some alcoholics had visitors. Can you imagine that? The aides would talk to us. They would give us their papers and carry on conversation. So the alcoholics were the class of the ward. And of course, all the mental people would see this, and they were kind of jealous of we alcoholics. And every time you asked one of them nuts what he was in there for, he said, "Oh, I'm an alcoholic." So he wanted to be in. And of course, we alcoholics, you asked us what we were in there for. We said we have a nervous breakdown, so you couldn't tell who was who. So neither group talked to me Saturday morning, Sunday, Monday morning. I guess they'd been watching me. I told them I was there for drinking. But Monday morning, the little head alcoholic, you know how we got little groups, little pecking orders. The little head alcoholic, a little guy named Ora. Sweet little guy, a little small guy. He was an alcoholic on the ward. He'd been there about 2 weeks. He came to me, and he started talking to me. He came up and called and said, "Joe, how you doing?" And he had the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't know anything about it. I don't know if he ever read it. I used to think we talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, but this guy always had the book. And he began to talk to me about, thank God, the men from Alcoholics Anonymous. This is why I think it's so important for me in my life today, and not only what I say, but what I do. And what I do might be a greater message than what I say, because this is why I'm here. I'm here because of what some people were doing. It was 3 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous, and Ora talked about these 3 men from Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't know about the program, but he talked about these 3 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous. And he would come to me every day, and he would take his cigarettes out. He knew I didn't have no cigarettes. This guy knew I didn't have no cigarettes. I had 50 cents when I got there. I bought 1 pack. They was 35 cents then. I never forget it. That's been inflation since then. They were 35 cents. I bought one pack and I blew that other 15 cents on some candy bars, and I'm busted. They did give you some of that roll-your-own tobacco. Call it top tobacco. They still buy it down in the prison system. They've been buying that stuff ever since then, for years. Prisons down there now call it devil dust. Makes you cough. But they'd give you a can of that tobacco, and you could roll your own cigarettes. Now, I ain't never rolled a cigarette in my life. I'm coming off a 6-week drunk, and I'm shaking, right? And I'm trying to roll a cigarette, and that thing falls all down in my lap and burns up, makes a mess, and I want a cigarette so bad. And here's a guy got a whole carton of Camels in the big book. God prepares his people, right? Now, the only way I could smoke was take my tobacco and my paper and give it to one of them nuts and let him roll it and lick it and give it back to me. And I didn't have no trouble talking about being unmanageable because I can't even smoke. And this guy's got a whole carton of Camels. I see him going there getting the packs every day. And he wants to talk to me. You know, I'm going to listen to him. So finally he says, don't you want to borrow a pack of cigarettes, Joe, until your friends get out here? I say, oh, yeah. And we'd talk, and he'd tell me about these guys from Alcoholics Anonymous. That Wednesday night, and like I say, that's been over 31 years ago. That Wednesday night, I'll never forget it, this old guy said AA meeting. And I left the back ward to that old hospital because a little drunk on a ward had been nice to me, smoking his cigarettes. And he asked me to go to this meeting. And, you know, he had been so nice to me, I wanted to go. So I went, and he also told me that these 3 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous were going to bring out some hot coffee. And he said, Joe, they bring out 3 packs of cigarettes and lay them on the table. So I left the back wards at old hospital to go out there so this guy could get me a cup of coffee and a real cigarette. That's really about what I wanted out of this deal, right? And God gave me a brand new life. You know? I found a way of life that I never knew existed. And tonight I know a little bit about heaven. And all I wanted out of this deal was a cup of coffee and a cigarette. And I met some real alcoholics out there, and one of them became my sponsor. Charles was there that night, not Charlie, but I say Charles. Charles Clark. I knew I'd break it in anonymity because he's passed this summer. Charles was there. It was a strange thing about the whole thing of this experience. It really goes back further than that, and I don't usually get into that great detail, but maybe it's necessary that I do. I never thought about it before. But when I was there, after I left there in 1960, there was a lady that came to work at the state hospital. She was a social worker. She was a social worker on the black wards. A black lady. She was a young lady, and she was just a social worker. She began to work there on the ward, and she said one day they talked about they was having a school on alcoholism at Yale University, and she said I had no interest at all in alcoholism, cared nothing about it, but I needed a trip. And so she decided that she'd get a free trip to Yale University. So she went to Yale University School of Alcoholism Studies. And she said there was nothing exciting there, but at night they was talking about meetings. They was going out to meetings. And I started going to some meetings with some guys. And she said they were some crazy people. They were the finest people I ever run into. And she said they were guys from Alcoholics Anonymous. And she went to AA. And she said while she was there at that school, she come home back from that school with one idea, to start an AA meeting for the people on her black ward. And she did. She started this meeting. And she went and found these guys in Little Rock to start a meeting on the black ward. And this meeting started 3 months after I got there. And she went and found the guy that was become my sponsor. And he was there that night. And he done, I guess he done like I hope I do. Can tell what it was like, what had happened, what it was like now. And Charles came out, got in trouble, and he was about 14 years old. Went to a boys' school in Indianapolis, Indiana, and his father was a minister. He come out of strict religious homes. It was so embarrassing to his people, even at 14 or 15 years old, until his father's profession, that while he was locked up, his family never had anything to do anymore with, never had any more contact with him or have anything to do with him for the rest of his life. And he took off and he stayed in trouble. He ended up in the penitentiary. He was a 4-time loser, did some federal time, and was in the Arkansas penitentiary, 38 years old. Started getting locked up when he was 14, was out 6 years by the time he was 38. And he was locked up in the Arkansas penitentiary for the second time. Did time in Texas, Illinois, and federal time. And he said one day the long line came in. That's the prisoners out working in the field. It rained, and when it rained one day, they stopped him from working. And he came from the field, and when he came back to his bunk, he found a book laying on his bed called Alcoholics Anonymous. Somebody said some idiot had left it on his bunk. And he said, when you're in a prison, you read anything, even the Bible, sometime in the back of your shirt collar. And he said he read that book. And as Charles said, when the first time I read it, I couldn't do this, but this guy had a brilliant mind. He said the first time I read it, I found a formula in that book in which I could change my life. And I took that opportunity. Charles had no hopes for parole, but in about 4 or 5 years, about 50-something, he came out of the penitentiary. He was paroled with 105 years against him. And he found me locked up 10 years later. Oh, God's grace. This is all the purpose. All the purpose. He was there. He was there. The right person. God thought enough to send the very best. He was there. And I remember him to get to talk about his life. And it was very powerful that this man stand before me. You know, and all the problems he had in his life, that his life had completely changed. He was a living example that this thing worked. You couldn't make nothing else about it. And I was so much impressed, our way alcoholics, we all skeptical. When I first went out there, I just said, these people, I did a bunch of holy rollers, that's all they are. I had already, didn't know nothing about Alcoholics Anonymous, but I knew everything. You know how we alcoholics are. I had my idea Alcoholics Anonymous is something like a plainclothes Salvation Army. They ain't got no uniforms, but, they whip God off on you and all that stuff. And this guy impressed me, you know what I mean? He didn't talk about me. He talked about himself. That's what the book says. Let him ask you. That's where I was inquisitive to know. So when the meeting was over, Charles was standing on the right-hand side of the room, like over there drinking coffee. And I went to go look him up. And I got around where he was. I didn't want him to think I really wanted to talk to him that bad. You know how we are. But I found it said, Charles, I hear what you said about what you did, but then I invited it. I never forget it. I said, but what do you think I should do? Boy, he was waiting on me. He looked at me with a big smile. He was tall and I was a beautiful guy at that time. Just like he always, all those years that I can remember, and he smiled. And he said, fella, I was telling you what I did. He said, frankly, I don't give a damn what you do. And he pointed his finger. I don't know why they all point their finger. He said, your thing is your business. Right? He said, that's your business. But he said, if you would like for me to show you, if you really want me to do that, I will show you. I will do that. And he was firm. In other words, I'm not playing with you. You could tell it in every fiber of his voice. Do not play with me, if that's what you want to do. And I think we can make a commitment right there. And sometimes I don't get to talk about Charles in my life, but I should. Maybe I should have over the years, but Charles was a powerful thing in my life. sometimes later on in the 60s, Governor Rockefeller became governor. Charles worked with so many alcoholics and did so many things for people in the state of Arkansas that, in the early 70s, late 60s, his criminal record was totally expunged. Charles was a great part of my life and guided me and directed me many years of my life. And this summer, Charles passed this summer. He had 44 years in the program. Great loss to my life. But anyway, I got out of that. It was tough. After getting out of the hospital, I didn't knock down the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. Charles told me, he said, alcoholics, we talk about today, alcoholics got a lot of business. You know how we got more business. That's a funny thing, we was talking about a day coming down here. Since I got sober, I ain't near as busy as I was when I was drunk. Being a drunk keeps you busy. You got a lot of business to take care of. So I had to take care of all my business. And I couldn't, the meeting was right out there at State Hospital, but I couldn't get out there. I didn't have no transportation. That's the funny thing about a drunk. While drunk, he can get from here to California, but sober, he can't get across town. He got no transportation. But, so I had all this business, and I just kind of went back to work. I didn't take a drink, but I wasn't too much going from it. And I wasn't going to meeting, know anything about a meeting, anything. He had this meeting on Wednesday night. But I think it was in June the 12th, 1962, I got a letter from Aura. And it says, Joe, I don't have time to write you. The little guy that was in the state hospital for me, I got out in April. And here it is in the 1st of June. I got a letter from Aura. He said, Joe, I don't have time to write you. But I'm coming to Little Rock to the meeting on Ward E3 Wednesday night. I'll see you there. I'll see you there. That was it. I don't know where I'd be without that little letter. It was just written on a piece of paper of his kid's tablet, folded over, stuck in the envelope, and it brought me back to Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't have been sober long. But I came back that Wednesday night, and Aura was there, and Aura was sober. And I remember going home after that meeting. It's the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what's here tonight. It ain't what nobody's going to say. It's this thing that goes between us. My book says we are average Americans, come from all sections of the country, different occupations, different religious, different social, different economic background. Right in this room, we're all different kinds, different colors. It says we're normally people that should not mix. None of us should ever knew the other one. We don't have nothing in common. And we come from different walks of life, different religions, different occupations. He said, but although that we are so mixed up in different kinds, he said that among us there's a fellowship, a friendliness, and it talks about that's indescribably wonderful. We're very close. There's something magic in these rooms. And it was there that night. And that's what's here tonight. That's what's in every room we go to. That's the magic of AA. This bond, and he said it's the bond of a common suffering. We're not bound by religion, economics, but we're bound by suffering. That's a strong, strong bond. And it was there that night. And it's in every group that we go to. And I remember going home telling my Lou Bell, I don't know what it was, I didn't know what it was. In fact, don't have to. I didn't get to analyze what was going on. I went home and Lou Bell said, well, how was the meeting? Oh, it was good. She said, what did they do? Well, how was it? Well, she had not been to one. She wasn't a man. She tried to ask me to explain what went on. And I said, oh, no, not a whole hell of a lot. She said, what did they do? I said, not a whole hell of a lot. They just drank a lot of coffee and smoked a lot of cigarettes. I said, but it makes you feel good. I believe I'll go back next week. That's all a brand new truck knows, you know. And that's all we need to know. And I went back next week. You know, thank God, sometimes I don't talk about Aura, but God used Aura in my life. Aura never made the program. Aura could stay sober 6 months and he'd get drunk. After I was in the program, I had 2 years in recovery. They opened the detox center. The first time they opened the detox center was in Benton in 1965. And one day a guy who was a good friend of mine in the program called me from Benton and said, Joe's a little friend of yours down here. You need to come see Aura's here. I had 2 years in the program, and I went to Benton to see Aura. And I sat down and spent time with Aura and tried to give back to Aura what Aura had given to me. And over a period of years, 2 years again, they'd call me and I'd go back. And Aura would be there every 2 to 3 years. About 8 or 9 years. And finally one day after I got to working in treatment, they brought me this guy come up and says, Joe, I got a friend of yours, needs some help. And it was about 10 or 12 years. And I went out there in the back of the car was a record of a sweet little guy I knew 10 or 12 years later. It was Aura. And they brought Aura into the Serenity House, and I worked with him for a month, and I know that no progress. So never be able to get through. He talked about the old days. He never talked about it now. And about a month after that, he went around the curve in an automobile drunk and burned up in an old barn. He never got what he brought to me. So, you know, we don't know why. I don't know. But I got involved with Charles. Charles is a special thing in my life. Charles went through the things that I had to go through. He was able to guide me because of his past experience. He was uniquely chosen. You know, this was 1962. And I was the first black in AA. And 1962 wasn't the best time to be the first black doing anything. I mean, it was a springtime it was a spring of the sit-ins and the demonstrations. You know, all this was just in its initials in '62. And I showed up in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I had great support. See, Charles came out of the Arkansas Penitentiary in the early 50s. And he was the first convict in Alcoholics Anonymous. You might think about it totally different now, but convicts were not welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1950. So Charles had already experienced the things that I had to experience. He was able to guide me. God used him uniquely in my life. And they told me, you know, I went to these meetings, and we had a meetings at the old dormitory, and when they found it, you know, one guy called me in one old man Neil. He said, Joe, I need to talk to you. And he said, you know, Joe, I love you, and I want you, will you be here in the morning? And I said, well, I'm here every morning at the meeting. He said, but I want you to ask you especially, will you promise me? I got to talk to you, but will you be here in the morning? I said, yeah, Neil, I will be here in the morning. He said, but what I want to tell you today is you're welcome to come to the meetings. He said, but when the meeting's over, don't hang around and drink coffee. When the meeting's over, leave. He said, but you'll be here in the morning, won't you? I said, I'll be here in the morning. You know, and people say, well, you know, how did you handle that? You know, I tell you how I handled it. I had a desire to stop drinking. And that's all you need to make this program. If you've got a desire to stop drinking, that handles everything you need. That's the only requirement to get in this program. That's the ticket to get in. You know, sometimes, you know, we have to have a ticket to get. You have to have a ticket for Alcoholics Anonymous. You didn't know, if they think it was free, it's the most expensive thing in the world. to get a desire to stop drinking. It takes a lot of drinking to get a desire to stop drinking. It takes a lot of DWIs, right? A lot of divorces, a lot of pain, right? It's expensive, right? Ain't no group in the world costs what it pays for us to get in here. No, it's not free. And I see some people come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope it's none here tonight. But I hope you all got a ticket. And I tell you, if you don't have a ticket, I can tell you how to get one. Go back out there and do some more drinking. That's the quickest way to get one. You can't get it sitting around here drinking coffee. But if you drink enough booze and you get in enough trouble, you'll get a desire to quit drinking. So I had that. So I proceeded, when we came in those days, I won't go, well, back in those days when we come in the program, talking about tonight, there was a lot different. Yes, Alcoholics Anonymous, it changes. People change. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous was pretty small then. Even though it was 20-some years old, it was relatively small as compared to today. There were just two groups in Little Rock. Everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous knew everybody else in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, it was small enough everybody knew everybody. Therefore, when you went to your first meeting, everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous knew you was new. Nowadays, you know, when you go to your meetings, we got so many groups. Somebody walks in, we don't know if they're new or not. They could be from another group or across town or visiting. They could just walk in and nobody would say much to them. You know, you could hang around in AA and die today, right? You can get lost and you can hang around and die. But in those days, the group was so small you couldn't hang around in AA. When you walked in that night, 4 or 5 of them old people grabbed you right away and started telling you the first night what you had to do. You know, you got the program. Now you can hang out in AA. You know, you can get lost. But they would grab you and tell you, have you got a sponsor? No. Have you did this? This is what you got to do. Boy, and when you go into a new outfit and you're amongst people and you don't know, but when they tell you what you have to do, you usually do it. I mean, because, you know, that's the way human nature is, to fit in. So they begin to tell me, Charles, you know, I said, well, we worked our steps in Little Rock back in those days. We worked our steps in the first 30 days in the program. When you came in, everybody worked the steps in the first 30 days. And we all did our inventories. And we all did our 5th steps. And we all made our amends list. And we had people we had to go see and to talk to. And you worked at this for the first day. You worked. You really worked. You know, and I think maybe that, you know, I didn't have the fellowship. I didn't have all that support of the other people. And maybe it was good because I really had to get down to real, you know, although my book said the fellowship is great, all this is great. I mean, but what really binds us together is we have a common solution. The real recovery is a common solution. And it says the common solution is a vital spiritual experience. And said this comes as a result of working the steps. So as a result of those steps, you know, I remember going through the steps, and the steps were real simple to me as I applied them in my life. The first step showed me my problem, and that's the first step of recovery. I thank God as an alcoholic I know and understand my problem as an alcoholic today. Many alcoholics don't even know they're alcoholics. Many alcoholics don't even understand what's going on in their life. And if you don't understand your problem, you're a victim of the problem. But once you understand the problem, then you've got to change. And I found out that I'm an alcoholic, and I had a disease called alcoholism. And Dr. Silkworth explained to me very vividly, you know, that I have a physical allergy to alcohol. I can't safely use alcohol. My body's not put together for alcohol. And I have an obsession of my mind to drink. That's my main problem. The fact that I'm allergic would be academic if I didn't take the first drink. So the second step, you know, based on the first step, and so much we look at the steps. The first step is the willingness is the foundation. Okay? Based on that willingness, I could believe differently. I could come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me. You know, so much we see the second step comes from the first step. Because you see, after you found out in the first step that you're powerless, then that indicates, obviously, as our book says, that the solution is power. Yeah. Obviously, it's power. So the second step talks about a solution. And then, you know, simply if we have established these things as read in chapter 5 tonight, if we have established these two great facts in our lives, if we establish ABCs talk about, if you establish the fact that you're powerless, and if you have sold on the idea that a power greater than yourself can help you, then your main job is how do you find that power? And we have some steps for that. We have a plan of action. And if you take this plan of action, that we know will tell you that will enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problems. And that plan was so simple. Simple but not easy. As I began to apply that plan to my life, and like I say, in the first 30 days or so, by that time I had been sober since March, but this was late August, early August, late July, sometime in August. And one day I was standing at work. It talks about that spiritual awakening. It talks about that awareness that we will have. One day we will know. We believe, we decide, we act, and we try, and finally we realize the success we've had. One day I was standing at work, and you know, I had been busy that morning, and I stopped to get a glass of water, and I was in a big, beautiful room. Sun coming through the window by myself. There wasn't any voices or anything like that. It was just me. I was the only one there. It wasn't no other entity in there, just me. And I had the reality. I became aware of the changes in my life. And I was standing there, and I began to say, the first time in my life I can remember comprehending the word serenity, maybe. First time I remember I could say, well, you know, things are just all right. It's all right. I said, well, how long has it been all right? And I didn't know. I really didn't know. But I know that had came about, I became personal aware that my life had changed as a result of these steps. And I knew if I could maintain where I was that morning, I would never have to drink again. You know, some fantastic things happened in my life, and I'm not going to go on and on about the changes, how it is now. Sometimes we don't talk about those things, but I've had some fantastic things happen in my life. Greatest thing, you know, I began to work with people. I've always, in the very beginning, my sponsor worked with people. My sponsor run a treatment center up in Batesville, opened up in the early 70s. Had about the third one in the state. He worked with the Alcohol Commission. He had came out of prison working with people, and he taught me things that I do today. Not only my recovery, but the things I do today with people came from my sponsor. And I started going to the old county farm, the penal farm, and carrying a meeting down there, and I went down there every Sunday morning for 10 years, and where the misdemeanors were locked up $1 a day for drunks, winos. I began to love those people, and they became a part of my life. And I began to go around the dormitory, and after 4 or 5 years, I began to sponsor people there. Right after a few months after I was sober, and I went there every morning, and I'd go there every Wednesday night and hold a meeting. Began to sponsor a lot of the other guys. So after 4 or 5 years, I began to work around that place, and doing a lot. It wasn't even volunteer; it's part of my life. And I was appointed to the board of directors of the 24-Hour Club, and as incorporated as what it was. And this was quite a thing for me. After here, I'm now on the board of directors, and they wouldn't even let me go in there and drink coffee 5 years ago. But I've been to do a lot of other things. So I always have just the results of working with people. I got involved with the state government in, I think, 1968. I was appointed by then Governor Bumpus to work on the ad hoc committee to set up the alcohol programs in the state of Arkansas. First time the federal programs. We worked on the planning of it and designed the state plan and set up the first programs in Arkansas, and I involved on that. Secretly, throughout the period of time, I was appointed by all the other governors, the Rockefeller Pryor, and all the other governors we've had to serve on with that particular agency. I've served on the advisory committee, and for 6 years for 12 years I served on the state authority that governs all the alcohol and drug programs in the state of Arkansas. And for 4 years I was chairman of that authority. It's quite a thing to be involved in running the programs to help other people in your state. And many years ago, you couldn't even get in one yourself. Where else could that happen but Alcoholics Anonymous? I've had many opportunities in my work and being involved with Alcoholics Anonymous to go travel probably around the world. Working with people in treatment all over the world in treatment centers. It's been a magnificent experience. And, this is, I know what the book is talking about, the big book, when he said, in my house there are many mansions. It's called we can grow as far as we want to grow. There are many mansions. We can grow out of one thing into a new. It's no end to what we can do in our lives through the tools, using the tools and principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. Tonight I can say, that I'm really grateful I am an alcoholic. I'm really grateful that I found recovery. I'm grateful for that recovery program and the power that I found in that program. And as I said, maybe all these things are part of really God's purpose in my life. And my life's purpose, and using my life in the purpose of others. I think that's the greatest thing that I say that we can discover is not only a new life, but a real purpose for being here. Thank you, and God bless you.